Alex looked at the waiter's simple notepad, then at his own gold watch, and barked an order with 2 fingers raised in a commanding gesture. To Alex, the young man standing before him wasn't an equal. He was a background actor in a performance of extreme wealth. He thought that by switching to a rapid-fire, complex Russian dialect, he could parade his sophistication in front of his date while mocking the peasant intellect of the help. He thought he was the most powerful man in the room. He was wrong. He didn't know that Kenny wasn't just a waiter, and the response he was about to receive, delivered in a chillingly precise Moscow accent, would not only silence the table, but expose the fraudulent foundations of his entire empire. This is the story of how a secret was unearthed in the shadows of a steakhouse. Welcome to Blood and Roses Chronicles. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. The air inside the restaurant smelled of dry-aged beef, expensive bourbon, and the cold weight of new money. For Kenny, however, it smelled like a deadline. Beneath his professional vest, his heart beat with the rhythmic urgency of his sister's hospital bills. It was peak hour. The roar of the dining room was a cacophony of deals being made and fortunes being flaunted, conversations that cost more than Kenny's military pension. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator was the only language that mattered in room 412. It was a mechanical, staccato breath that cost $400 an hour, a sound that haunted Kenny's sleep and drove his waking life. He stood by the glass partition of the intensive care unit, watching his younger sister, Maya. Her face, once vibrant and quick to laughter, was now pale, framed by a web of plastic tubing. Kenny pressed his palm against the cool glass. 3 years ago, he had been sitting in a windowless room at Fort Meade, deciphering encrypted communications from the Volga-region. As a military intelligence analyst, he had been a ghost in the machine, a man who could dismantle a billion-dollar smuggling ring by spotting a single irregular verb in a sea of data. He had lived for the high-stakes chess match of global security. But when the stateside call came, the car accident, the shattered spine, the collapsed lungs, the chess match ended. He had taken an honorable discharge, trading his clearance levels for a server's apron. In the eyes of the government, he was a decorated veteran. In the eyes of the hospital's billing department, he was an account in arrears. Mr. Vance? Kenny turned to see Dr. Aris standing there, a tablet tucked under his arm. The look in the doctor's eyes was one Kenny knew well, the compassionate wall. Maya is stable, but the window for the corrective spinal surgery is closing, Aris said softly. The specialist from Zurich is in the city next week. But without the deposit, the hospital board won't authorize the theater time. We're looking at $60,000, Kenny. By Friday. I'll have it, Kenny said, his voice flat and certain, though his bank account held exactly $812. Kenny, you're working doubles. You look like you're fading, the doctor countered. I'm fine, Kenny replied, straightening his shoulders. He still carried himself with the rigid discipline of the service, back straight, eyes alert, mind always 3 steps ahead. I just need the shifts. He kissed the glass one last time and headed for the subway. He swapped his worn hoodie for a crisp white shirt in the cramped locker room of the Gilded Prime. As he fastened his black vest, he checked his reflection. The analyst was still in there, hidden behind the subservient mask of a waiter. He just needed one big night. One table of high rollers. One opportunity to turn the skills he used to protect a nation into the fuel that would save his sister's life. He didn't know yet that at table 12, a man in a navy suit was waiting to give him exactly what he needed, though not in the way he expected. The heavy oak doors of the Gilded Prime swung open, admitting a gust of cold Manhattan air and a man who acted as if he owned the oxygen within it. Alex strode into the dining room first, his navy designer suit catching the amber glow of the chandeliers. He didn't wait for the hostess. He led the way, his polished Oxfords clicking against the marble like a countdown. Trailing slightly behind him was a woman in a deep crimson dress, her presence as striking as a siren's call, though her eyes remained fixed on the back of Alex's head with a mixture of boredom and practiced fascination. Table 12. The one with the view, Alex barked, not looking at the staff. He pulled out his own chair before the maitre d' could reach it, a move designed to signal that he followed no rules but his own. Kenny watched from the service station, his eyes narrowing. He recognized the type, the tech bro titan, who mistook volume for value. Alex immediately cleared a space on the white linen tablecloth, not for bread or water, but for a thick leather portfolio. He fanned out a series of stock charts and internal projections, the bold red lines of market volatility clashing with the elegant setting. To Alex, this wasn't a dinner, it was a theater of conquest. "Look at these numbers, Elena," Alex said, his voice carrying just a bit too far, ensuring the neighboring tables heard the word millions. "The Siberian merger is the play of the century. They don't see me coming. They never do." The woman, Elena, rested her chin on her hand, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. She watched him pull a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen from his pocket, a prop for a signature that hadn't happened yet. On the corner of the table, he tossed a black titanium credit card with a sharp clack, leaving it there like a trophy. Kenny smoothed his apron and stepped forward, his mental folders already opening. In his old life, he would have flagged Alex's loud talk of Siberian mergers as a high-level security risk. Here, he was just supposed to offer the specials. "Good evening," Kenny said, his voice a steady, neutral anchor against Alex's frenetic energy. "Welcome to the Gilded Prime. My name is Kenny, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Alex didn't look up from his charts. He tapped his fingers on the leather portfolio, his eyes scanning a column of figures. "Water. Sparkling. And bring the cellar list, the private one. I'm not drinking what the tourists drink." Kenny nodded, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on a specific line of Cyrillic text visible at the edge of Alex's documents. The billionaire thought he was sitting in a room of subordinates, but he had just invited a master codebreaker to read his cards. The wine list sat unopened on the table, a leather-bound distraction Alex had already dismissed. He leaned back, his thumb hooked into the pocket of his bespoke vest, watching Kenny with a predatory stillness. Beside him, Elena laughed at a joke the rest of the room wasn't privy to, her hand fluttering near her lips as she leaned into Alex's space. She wasn't just his date, she was his audience, and Alex was a man who performed best when he had someone to crush. "You know, Elena," Alex said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial register that was still loud enough to grate, "the problem with these places is the lack of culture. You can buy the finest Wagyu in the world, but you can't buy a staff that understands the nuances of the regions they serve." He turned his gaze to Kenny, a smug, thin-lipped smile spreading across his face. He didn't ask for the specials. Instead, he took a deep breath and switched languages. But he didn't just speak Russian. He spoke a rapid-fire, overly florid version of the language, thick with the technical jargon of a man who had spent too much time in high-end Moscow lounges and not enough time learning the soul of the words. "Listen closely, my friend," Alex sneered in Russian, his accent forced and guttural. Translation: "I want the ribeye, but tell the chef if it isn't charred to a black crust while remaining bloody in the center, I'll have his job. And bring a bottle of the 96 and try not to drop it with those clumsy peasant hands. Do you even understand me, or should I draw you a picture in the dirt?" He sat back, crossing his arms, his eyes gleaming with a malicious light. He waited for the blank stare, the stuttering apology, the panicked look of a service worker who had been stepped on in a language they couldn't speak. He wanted Kenny to feel small, to feel like a ghost in his own city. Elena tilted her head, her eyes flitting between the two men, waiting for the punchline of Alex's cruel joke. Kenny stood perfectly still. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of the steakhouse seemed to retreat into a dull roar, leaving only the sharp, electric space between him and the billionaire. He remembered the cold nights in the Maryland suburbs, the headphones pressing against his ears as he tracked the movement of illicit funds through the Ural Mountains. He knew the slang Alex was using. It was the dialect of the nouveau riche, the new Russians who thought volume was a substitute for class. Kenny didn't reach for his notepad. He didn't call for a manager. He simply tilted his head, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth, the look of a man who had just seen a rank amateur play his hand far too early. The trap was set, and Alex had walked right into it, unaware that the waiter he was mocking had once spent his days listening to the very secrets Alex was now trying so desperately to hide. The silence at table 12 was no longer passive, it was a physical weight. Alex sat poised in his chair, a smirk of anticipated victory frozen on his face as he waited for Kenny to crumble. Elena's hand remained suspended near her lips, her eyes darting between the two men, sensing a shift in the air that Alex was too arrogant to feel. Kenny didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He simply let the mask of the subservient waiter dissolve, revealing the cold, analytical steel of the man who had once been the invisible eyes of the state. When he spoke, his voice was no longer the soft, neutral tone of the service industry. It was deep, resonant, and carried the razor-sharp precision of a high-ranking Muscovite official. "Actually, sir," Kenny began, his Russian so perfect it made Alex's previous attempt sound like a child's tantrum. Translation: your grammar is as sloppy as your business ethics. If you wish to order the 96, I suggest you use the genitive case correctly. And as for the chef, he doesn't take orders from men who can't even differentiate between a true Bordeaux and the vinegar you clearly grew up drinking. Alex's smirk didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His mouth hung open, a silent "oh" of disbelief. But Kenny wasn't finished. He leaned down, ostensibly to adjust a fork, and lowered his voice to a whisper that only Alex could hear, a whisper that carried the chill of a Siberian winter. "And a word of advice for the future," Kenny murmured, still in flawless Russian. "Next time you're discussing the frozen assets of the Omsk Siberian Shell Company, you might want to ensure your waiter isn't a former intelligence officer. Your February transaction didn't just disappear, Alex. It was flagged. And the people I used to work for? They don't forget a face." Kenny straightened up, the professional mask snapping back into place as if it had never left. He offered a polite, shallow nod to the stunned billionaire and a small, charming smile to Elena, who was now looking at Alex as if he were a stranger. "I'll see to that steak immediately," Kenny said in English, his voice back to its calm, service-ready tenor. "Medium rare, charred on the outside. And I'll bring a wine more suited to your current situation." He turned on his heel with military precision, leaving Alex paralyzed. The billionaire's face had turned a sickly shade of ash, his hand trembling as it reached for the water glass. The stock charts on the table, once his pride, now looked like evidence. Kenny walked away, his heart hammering, not with fear, but with the soaring realization that the skills he thought were dead were about to save his sister's life. The air at table 12 had turned from expensive to toxic. Alex sat frozen, his fingers digging into the edge of the leather portfolio until his knuckles turned white. The frozen assets, Kenny had whispered, weren't just a business setback, they were a death sentence for his reputation. He could feel Elena's gaze, no longer admiring, but sharp and inquisitive, like a hawk spotting a crack in a stone wall. He had to erase the man who had seen behind the curtain. He had to destroy Kenny before Kenny's former colleagues destroyed him. Alex's panic manifested as a sharp, jagged aggression. He looked down at the table, his eyes darting frantically, searching for a weapon. His gaze landed on the black titanium credit card sitting by the floral centerpiece. With a practiced, sleight-of-hand motion born of years of deceptive dealing, he swept the card off the table and into the shadow of his own lap, sliding it deep into the cuff of his sock. "Where is it?" Alex suddenly bellowed, his voice cracking with a manufactured frenzy. He stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the marble floor, drawing the eyes of every diner in the room. My card. My black card was right here. Kenny, who had been 3 tables away, turned back, his face a calm sea in the middle of Alex's storm. He walked back toward the table, his pace measured. Is there a problem, sir? A problem? You stole it. Alex shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Kenny's chest. I saw you lean in. You were whispering that Russian nonsense to distract me while you took it. It's a 6-figure limit card. Manager. I want the manager right now. The floor manager, a man named Marcus who lived in constant fear of a bad review, came scurrying over, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, please, let's be calm. Don't tell me to be calm. Alex hissed, his face a violent shade of crimson. This waiter, this thief, is standing here in a cheap vest acting like a genius, and now my card is gone. Search him. Right here, in front of everyone. Empty your pockets, Kenny, or I'm calling the NYPD and making sure you never work in this city again. I'll see you in a cell by midnight. Kenny stood perfectly still, the center of a silent, judging circle. He could feel the weight of the restaurant's collective gaze. He thought of Maya, of the surgery deposit due by Friday, and of the fragile life held together by a ventilator. If he was even accused of theft, the hospital board would see him as a liability. Alex wasn't just trying to save his own secret. He was trying to bury Kenny under the weight of a lie. But Alex had made one fatal mistake. He had forgotten that an analyst never enters a room without identifying every exit and every witness. The dining room was a theater of judgment, the air thick with the smell of scorched steak and the sudden, metallic tang of fear. Marcus, the manager, was sweating through his silk tie, his eyes darting from the billionaire's expensive suit to Kenny's calm, unmoving face. Behind the bar, the clinking of ice had stopped. Every phone in the vicinity was raised, the small glowing screens capturing Alex's manufactured rage for an audience of millions. Empty them, Kenny, Marcus pleaded, his voice a low, frantic whisper. Just show him. If we don't resolve this now, he'll burn this place to the ground. Think about your job. Kenny didn't move. He looked at Alex, seeing past the designer navy fabric and into the desperate, frantic pulse in the man's neck. He knew exactly what Alex was doing. It was a diversionary strike, a tactic used by cornered assets to shift the focus from their own treachery to a fabricated crime. If Kenny emptied his pockets, he was submitting to the billionaire's reality. If he didn't, he was a thief in the eyes of the law. I have nothing to hide, Marcus, Kenny said, his voice carrying the steady, unshakable weight of a man who had survived interrogations far more brutal than a dining room scene. But I will not be searched based on a lie designed to cover up a felony. Mr. Sterling knows exactly where that card is. Are you calling me a liar? Alex shrieked, his voice hitting a glass-shattering register. He turned to the room, spreading his arms. You hear this? The help is accusing me. I'm the one who provides jobs for people like him. I'm the one who keeps the economy moving while he steals from the people who tip him. Elena, sitting in her red dress, had gone completely still. She looked at the stock charts scattered on the table, then back at Alex. For the first time, a flicker of genuine realization crossed her face, not of Kenny's guilt, but of Alex's instability. Alex, sit down, she murmured, her voice cold. You're making a scene. I'm making a point. Alex roared. He slammed his fist onto the table, sending a crystal water glass toppling. Call the police, Marcus. No. I want him in handcuffs. I want to watch him lose everything. Kenny watched the glass shatter, the shards scattering like the life he had tried so hard to rebuild for Maya. The $60,000 he needed by Friday felt like it was drifting away into the dark. He could feel the trap closing, the weight of the billionaire's influence pressing down on his chest. But in the periphery of his vision, at table 14, a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit slowly closed his menu. He had been watching the entire exchange with the quiet, predatory focus of a man who dealt in the ultimate currency, the truth. The sirens hadn't arrived yet, but the air in the restaurant felt just as blue and cold. Marcus, the manager, was physically shaking now, his hand hovering over a telephone as he looked at Kenny with a mixture of pity and cowardice. Alex stood over the table like a conqueror, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with the frantic energy of a man who believed that if he shouted loud enough, the truth would simply cease to exist. "Last chance, Kenny," Marcus stammered. "The police are 2 minutes out. Just give it back. Whatever trouble you're in, we can handle it internally. Think about your family." Kenny felt the phantom weight of Maya's hand against the glass partition of the ICU. He thought of the $60,000, the specialized surgery, and the quiet, rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. If he was let out of here in zip ties, the sister's breath would stop. The medical board would revoke his access, and his sister would become a statistic. The stakes weren't just his reputation, they were her life. "I will not yield to a theater of shadows," Marcus, Kenny said. His voice was a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He looked directly into Alex's eyes, using the same gaze he once used to break high-level informants. "Mr. Sterling, you are a man of many secrets. You think this room is filled with people who only see your suit. But you've forgotten the fundamental rule of intelligence. The loudest person in the room is always the most vulnerable." "Shut up." Alex lunged forward, invading Kenny's personal space, the scent of expensive gin and desperate sweat rolling off him. "You're a waiter. You're a nobody. You're the guy who brings the bread and clears the scraps. You don't get to talk to me about vulnerability. You're going to jail, and I'm going to make sure your sister rots in whatever hole she's in." The mention of Maya snapped the last thread of Kenny's restraint. His hands didn't fly to Alex's throat. Instead, they clenched at his sides, his posture shifting into a combat-ready stance that made Alex instinctively recoil. "Search me," Kenny whispered, the words sounding like a death sentence. "Call the officers. Let them come. But understand this, Alex. Once the police arrive, the chain of custody begins. Every camera in this building will be seized. Every word you spoke in Russian will be transcribed. And when they don't find that card in my pocket, they're going to start wondering why a billionaire is so desperate to ruin a waiter." Alex's eyes darted toward his own feet, a split-second tell that confirmed Kenny's suspicion. The billionaire's confidence wavered for a fraction of a second, a hairline fracture in a diamond. The room held its breath. The interrogation had reached its absolute breaking point. The standoff was a brittle pane of glass, vibrating under the frequency of Alex's panting breath. The billionaire opened his mouth to deliver one final, crushing insult, but the sound was cut short by the deliberate, rhythmic clink of a silver spoon against a crystal glass. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the suffocating silence of the room, it rang out like a gavel. From table 14, the silver-haired man in the charcoal suit rose slowly. He didn't have Alex's frantic swagger. He moved with the tectonic weight of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. As he stepped into the light, Marcus's jaw dropped. Even Alex's rage seemed to hit a wall of ice. This was Arthur Vance, no relation to Kenny, but a name feared in every boardroom and backroom in Manhattan. He was the senior federal prosecutor who had dismantled 3 of the city's largest racketeering rings in a single year. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said. His voice was a gravelly baritone that brooked no argument. "You stay out of this, Vance," Alex hissed, though his voice lacked its previous edge. "This thief took I've been sitting 6 feet away from you for 90 minutes, Alex," Arthur interrupted, walking toward them with his hands tucked into his pockets. "I've heard everything. I heard your rather clumsy attempts at Russian, and I heard your fascinating mention of the Omsk-Siberian Shell Company. But more importantly, I saw your hands." Alex's eyes widened, his gaze flickering toward the floor. "The human eye is trained to follow motion," Arthur continued, stopping inches from Alex. "You're a master of digital deception, but a rank amateur at physical misdirection. I saw you sweep that titanium card off the linen. I saw you slide it into your left sock while Marcus was looking at the wine list. It was a pathetic display for a man who claims to be a titan of industry. "You're mistaken," Alex stammered, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. Am I? Arthur reached into his jacket and pulled out a high-end digital recorder, its red light still glowing. "I also have the last 30 minutes of your business conversation recorded. It seems your Siberian play involves a significant amount of money laundering. And now, you've attempted to frame a decorated veteran and a public servant for a crime you committed yourself." Arthur looked at Kenny, a spark of profound respect in his tired eyes. "I know a man under pressure when I see one, Kenny. You handled this interrogation better than most of my federal agents." He turned back to Alex, his expression hardening into a mask of pure justice. "Alex, reach into your sock. Pull out the card. Now. Or I'll ensure that when the officers arrive in 30 seconds, the first thing they do is a forensic search of your person and your portfolio." With trembling hands and the eyes of the entire world on him, Alex reached down. The room gasped as he pulled the black titanium card from his cuff. The silence that followed was absolute, the sound of a billionaire's empire collapsing under the weight of a single, desperate lie. The black card hit the white linen with a heavy, hollow thud, the sound of a billionaire's immunity finally shattering. Alex looked around the room, but the audience he had spent the night trying to impress was now a wall of cold, recording lenses. Elena didn't say a word. She simply stood up, grabbed her clutch, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance, leaving Alex alone in a sea of his own wreckage. When the police arrived moments later, they didn't reach for Kenny. They moved toward Alex, led by the quiet authority of Arthur Vance. "Wait." Alex scrambled, his designer suit suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. "This is a mistake. I have a merger on Monday." "On Monday, Alex, you'll have an arraignment," Arthur replied coldly. As the officers led the billionaire out through the oak doors, the dining room erupted into a hesitant, then roaring applause. Marcus, the manager, tried to approach Kenny with an apologetic hand on his shoulder, but Kenny stepped back. He didn't need a manager's hollow praise. He untied his apron and laid it across the table. He was done being a silhouette. Arthur Vance walked over, his eyes fixed on Kenny. "You have a rare gift, Kenny. Not just for languages, but for the kind of analytical discipline the government usually loses the moment a man hangs up his uniform. I know about your sister. I know about the surgery." Kenny's heart skipped. "How?" "I don't just prosecute criminals. I research the people who stand up to them," Arthur said, handing Kenny a thick, cream-colored business card. "The Federal Financial Crimes Unit is opening a new task force on Eastern European money laundering. We need analysts who can hear a slip of a verb and see a billion-dollar fraud. The starting salary includes a comprehensive federal health plan. It covers St. Jude's. It covers the surgery. All of it." Kenny stared at the card. It wasn't just a job. It was the sister's breath, made permanent. 6 months later, the morning sun flooded a private recovery suite in Westchester. Maya sat in a wheelchair by the window, her back straight, her hands moving as she sketched the garden outside. The ventilator was gone. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of her charcoal on paper. Kenny stood in the doorway, wearing a charcoal suit of his own, his federal ID tucked into his pocket. He had spent the morning dismantling a shell company in Cyprus, but the real victory was right here. "Kenny?" Maya turned, her voice clear and strong. "Ready to go for a walk?" He smiled, a deep, true warmth finally reaching his eyes. He had spent years in the shadows, listening to the secrets of the powerful, but today, the only words that mattered were the ones his sister could finally say. He had reclaimed his destiny, proving that while money can buy a Navy suit, it can never buy the silent, unbreakable power of the truth. The fall of Alex was not caused by a lack of money or a lack of power. It was caused by the delusion that status is a shield against character. He viewed Kenny as a prop because he couldn't imagine a world where a waiter possessed a mind sharper than his own. The story of Kenny and Alex serves as a powerful reminder. True class is not a dialect you speak to show off. It is the integrity you maintain when you think no one is watching. Kenny didn't win because he spoke Russian. He won because he remained a man of substance in a room full of shadows. He traded a tray for a shield, proving that while a billionaire can hide behind a navy suit, he can never truly hide from a man who knows how to read between the lines. If that moment Kenny leaned in and shattered Alex's confidence sent a chill down your spine, then click that like button right now. Subscribe to Blood and Roses Chronicles to join our community for more cinematic journeys into the shadows where arrogance meets its match. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Kenny's shoes, holding a secret that could change everything? Remember, the world might look at your uniform, your title, or your bank account today and think they know your worth. But never forget, you hold a signal that can change the world. See you on the next one.